and welcome to Afterlife Topics. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing to the channel or becoming a patron at patreon.com/Afterlife Topics. Before we begin this video, please note that the following material has been sourced from careful spirit communication processes, which have been verified and corroborated through experimentation via Afterlife Topics team members. However, as always, please try to verify this information yourself through your own communication methods. Hello everybody, welcome to Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. This is Cyrus. I know it's been a minute since I had any videos up, but here I am again. Been pretty busy with my work as well as my team upstairs. In this video, I want to stress some very important subjects. This concerns actual politics and affairs of the other side. As I stress a lot in my videos, the other side, what we call the afterlife, is a real place. It's not just some kind of fairy dream world that is just based upon our thoughts. It is actually essentially our universe as a copy of that universe. And that universe essentially has everything in it that's here in terms of spatial geography. So we have the Milky Way galaxy, the Andromeda galaxy, the Spinwheel galaxy, all of it. It's all there. And when we meet, for example, with ETs, all of types of ET groups that you see, you hear about, who sometimes take people away while they're sleeping and do experiments on them, and are also sometimes very nice people, depends. That group, or I say groups like that, come from that side. So that's why we can't really spot them, because they phase in from that side, or they come into the near-Earth astral plane. But I'm just saying all this so everyone understands that there's real politics and real things going on that side. As such, there's a kind of creepy philosophy that belongs to a group/religion known as the Aldmari that is basically now extinct except for their influence that remains on this planet. So that's what I want to talk about, because my spirit team says it's very important to talk about this and to talk about how the timeline crisis ended quite recently. And let's just say the good guys won, but it's still really important to talk about what happened, their philosophy, and how to keep fighting the spirit of them that kind of remains. So if you want to know what I'm talking about, let's keep watching this video, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're into basically things like the goings on, the political dramas of the astral plane. Okay, let's continue. So today's presentation is Why the Wheel of Karma Does Not Stop and the Fall of the Aldmari. Information from the universe beyond, with some credits of people who have helped me make this. So who are/were the Aldmari? Well, I would frankly call them the lamest, most corporate, massive civilization in what we call the astral cosmos. It is, or I should say was, approximately 2.7 billion Aldmari aligned planets, with many human-style species and other species such as the insect-like species. So on the left-hand side is a mantid ET, which many people have seen in their experiences. These guys, there's many of them who are perfectly cool, but the Aldmari civilization attracted collectives like this. On the right is a depiction of kind of the militaristic style of the humans in those civilizations, of which there were many, because these guys actually they're a spin-off from another big human civilization known as the Ashtar. Right, so the Ashtar essentially came first, and then these guys were a spin-off. And that's kind of a good example above that I was led to on the internet, an image of an Aldmari city over on that side. This would be probably a 5th density or 6th density city. And as such, you'll see it is just kind of almost what you'd expect, but it's important to note that the Aldmari, they had their own way of doing things. The Aldmari they didn't really like much creativity, so you wouldn't see many great artistic styles. In fact, this picture might not even do it much justice, because that is kind of a cool looking place, isn't it? Because as far as I know, the Aldmari, they just didn't like architecture. They didn't really like art. They were just very militaristic, controlling, and really, really into collectivizing themselves, which is why particular very collectivized ET races would join their collectives. So it was easily the greatest, most powerful civilization in this astral cosmos, and they were masters of timeline manipulation and psychological manipulation. Wide-scale starseed influence also affected our planet. Now, I am informed that those spirit guides do not exist anymore, right? It's just that the problem is that their ideas are a bit embedded into culture. As I said before, they no longer are in direct existence on this timeline. As I said also at the beginning of the video, this timeline crisis ended. I talked a little bit about this in the prior video. They just became too evil to persist. It reached a point where, let's just say, God sort of deleted them. Kind of Back to the Future stuff went on, but their spirit still persists. So more specifics. They were founded by the founder of Ashtar, Milandara, in the astral Andromeda galaxy. And again, galaxies exist there just like here. The Ashtar, if you want to know more about them, just Google them. They are very well known through mediums and channels and things like that. So I think that's a very interesting point. Milandara was the founder of Ashtar. She was from an aquatic progenitor race dating to the earliest days, approximately 14 billion years ago. Helped usher in the kind of beautiful human-like forms that we are aware of into the cosmos. There was a philosophical divide approximately 8 billion years ago, though, and this Aldmari group were the result of that divide. As a result, the Aldmari became very powerful because a belief in usurping karma is in fact a powerful but foolish weapon. So, to basically recap, it would seem that the Aldmari were a spin-off from the Ashtar, and it was a kind of philosophical way of viewing things that got very much out of hand, and it's also why this group of, well, if you want to call them ETs, call them whatever you want, why they became so powerful. Some more specifics. The capital of the Aldmari civilization was a planet called Ormedlo. Their own high command consisted of a council of 100 led by Milandara herself. The Aldmari were notorious for bankrolling, funding factions against each other, and doing the types of kind of horrible things that governments on this planet do sometimes. They would sow division in the cosmos, and then they would pick up the pieces and take over. Aldmari architecture is based on efficiency. No great interest in beauty or splendor. Aldmari occupied planets would basically see beauty slowly replaced by efficiency. In fact, being captivated by things like beauty was just another material attachment to shrug away, because their religion really was all based around God, or so they thought, because they all thought that anything that was beautiful, anything that you really enjoy, these were all attachments that you can use as a tool temporarily until you transcend beyond that tool, and then you become closer and closer to God until you can finally achieve that state of godliness. So it kind of sounds familiar with other philosophies we hear these days, for example on the New Age aisle, and that's where we go back to the subject of Aldmari spirit guides and how these ideas just kept basically coming into our planet more and more and more and more, and they're still there. And that is why I refer to the Aldmari sometimes in the present tense, because their spirit is still around. Let's talk more about the founder of both Ashtar and the Aldmari. Basically, as mentioned before, progenitor beings brought forth human appearances throughout the cosmos and later took those forms themselves. They did not create humanity, essentially God did, but they helped to implement it among the races. The source of this is essentially light being communications. Milandara was not evil, as the world is not so black and white, but she was a ruthless dictator. She had a bit of a split personality, actually, a side of her that was evil, a side of her that was very good. She was much loved yet feared throughout the cosmos of the astral prior timeline. She had a beautiful appearance, but it was just a mask. Beauty can manipulate others. She had shown affection and love for her people even to a great extent, but can hide behind her mask and allow that truly evil side to surface, which basically took on a mind of its own. Now would be a good point to take a look at the image on the left, because this was another image I was drawn to, which very closely resembles the way Milandara looks as I've been able to see her through astral experiences to see what she looked like. In fact, I've even been in communication with her as well, which may be a crazy thing for people to learn, but where do you think I'm able to kind of get this information from? And I'll get to that in a moment. So she was greatly venerated across the stars and formed the Aldmari due to a personal existential crisis and disconnection from Source, which also relates to why she's been trying to undo a lot of the damage that she caused. She was heavily opposed by Minarasa of the Ashtar High Command for eons. It was a constant back and forth battle. And see an upcoming video that I'll make later about who Minarasa is, known in our mythology as Minerva. So I finally want to mention that in the new timeline, she has relived her entire life without helping form the Aldmari and experienced a complete transition, again, back to the future stuff. And she is now perfectly good-natured. The Aldmari principles of sociopathy and the things that the Aldmari civilization used to, quote, enhance themselves really twisted her mind. After all this time travel work was implemented, she relived her whole entire life and created a whole new timeline without the Aldmari. Not just her, with the help of many, but it's like, let's just say the astral universe had a do-over. Which is not that unheard of. These types of things happen on that side that are a bit incomprehensible to us, but apparently this was a big one. For the next slide, let's get to Aldmari beliefs. The name Aldmari means to become kings or queens. It is both a name of a race and a religion or spiritual path. And the removal of karma was their chief belief. Where have we heard this philosophy before? Karma occurs naturally. It is the result of our interconnectedness. You cannot harm someone without, in a way, hurting yourself. However, you can fool yourself using great psychic powers and restraints to believe that you are unaffected by such forces. So they really believed in stopping the wheel of karma. Because by stopping the wheel of karma, you will be able to do anything you want, live free, and basically be unaffected by almost anything. And you'll be closer to God. Sounds really lovely, doesn't it? I don't think that this is necessarily the healthiest philosophy when you analyze it more deeply, which we'll continue to do. The Aldmari have a belief in themselves as a great and separate force from God, of neither darkness or light but grayness. They have a bit of an obsession with the color gray, which may explain all the dull gray architecture. Do you remember a video that I pulled down a while back? Remember the gray sun of Quotha? Well, that gray sun of Quotha is basically a big metaphor about some of their belief systems they had. So it was difficult because instead of just straight up talking about the Aldmari, it was put into a metaphorical form, which is exactly the way Arcturians like to do things. So it caused a bunch of confusion. I pulled the video down, but that was the metaphor that we were talking about a very real thing that had this, they put this crazy H.P. Lovecraftian twist on it. Aldmari beliefs continued. As such, one can achieve among the highest statuses of Aldmari spirituality a special title called Malnajadara. This was known by the Aldmari as a state of divine integration, whereupon a soul is becoming like their own god and can then rewrite the forces of karma. And what this in layman terms means is becoming a complete sociopath. Achieving Malnajadara is a celebrated feat. It would be like ascension to 7th density, for they disregarded even this as something unimportant compared to sociopathy. So to relate, we are on a spectrum scale of consciousness ascension. Basically, the beginning of the highest stages we would call 7th density. And this is a pretty awesome state of mind to be in, because it would mean all timelines that somebody may exist in, all like different versions of somebody, all the different versions of somebody that is out there and interweaving throughout basically the multiverse, all collapse together into a singular unit of consciousness that transcends all of them. And when this happens, a person's mind becomes incredibly clear and in many ways incredibly powerful. So achieving 7th density consciousness is something that is revered by the astral cosmos. But the Aldmari didn't even care about that so much. They cared about becoming a sociopath, somebody who could bypass karma. To them, that was real power. If you're getting creeped out by now, that makes sense. Aldmari beliefs continued. Aldmari believed in an end goal of existence. Merging with God. This itself is unnatural, as there is no true death, yet they desired it and have thus spread the belief of a final merging and annihilation process. I find this very interesting because in the afterlife communities, there's a strange trend for people who seem to want an afterlife, but they also don't want an afterlife because they think you should just die and then merge directly with God and disappear. Or also perhaps merge with the soul group collective without first experiencing what the afterlife is like. And as a result of that, it's just kind of a strange philosophy to me, and always has been if you've ever noticed the main messages in my books. So this type of thinking simply doesn't occur among people actually connected to God and love. Existential thoughts are a result of a great disconnection. In higher realms, there is no fear of eternity or such things. However, even the 7th density Aldmari maintain this thinking. This information comes from channeling a light being collective. Aldmari planets of an advanced status possess no art or culture as we define it. These two are just attachments to transcend. Aldmari beliefs continued. Aldmari have no interest in emotions. All emotions, with the exception of certain strong emotions like hatred, are based upon materiality and disconnection from the splendor of God. Yet, ironically, they cannot even feel splendor. At least they were not able to, and again, some of these beliefs do persist today in this timeline. Aldmari do not enjoy things. It sounds bizarre, but enjoyment is merely something else to transcend. Aldmari do not feel depression or the negative elements of it either, so they think. Aldmari believe they are eternally present. As such, they are not caught within a cycle of emotion or feelings, because to them this is spiritual enlightenment. So it's interesting in certain philosophies, and that includes variations of Buddhist or Zen philosophies, that one should be present in the moment in the absence of emotions or things happening around you. But my spirit team basically tells me that, shall we say, it is actually much better to practice meditation by integrating with your environment, your emotions, everything, and just absorbing all that into you. It's also nice to meditate in a clear-headed kind of way, where your mind becomes very, very clear and present. But this is not the same as transcending emotion, and yet there are philosophies that seem to espouse, well, they do espouse, basically overcoming emotion to enter a state of tranquility and peace, which sounds nice on paper, but this is exactly the practices of the Aldmari spiritual teachers, who in a sense espoused practices of Zen. This isn't to say that Zen is bad. However, Zen and philosophies like this can be taken too far. But what I am saying, and what the spirit team is basically saying to me right now, is that those philosophies can get out of hand until we go into that category of thinking that I've often talked about in my books, where it's like we don't need emotion, we become emotionless, let's say orbs who do not really get to experience things as we experience them, because these are all things that we forget about. In fact, recently on the Afterlife Topics forum, there was somebody arguing that you don't have fun when you die because fun is kind of an attachment, and we experience it, quote, differently over there, and these are things we have to get over if we want to spiritually evolve. To me, that's a bunch of nonsense. My spirit team thinks it's nonsense, and I have a pretty darn advanced spirit team, and this is the stuff that is basically having to be resisted. So I'll make it very clear, those are not healthy philosophies, but it's easy to get caught up in those philosophies because it's nice to feel a bit superior, right? You can look at other people and say, look, they're all having fun, they're doing these things, they're attached to the earth, they're doing this kind of unevolved type of thinking which we can transcend beyond and become superior. And basically, that's it. So that's why people get caught up in that. And it's not healthy thinking, as I've been saying for a long time. Now for the trigger warning, because this is some really bad SHIT. Aldmari believed in mastering karma by doing evil or abhorrent acts in a ritualistic way. This was not all Aldmari. This was basically the higher echelons. So, this included the harm of innocent beings, from, yes, I'm sorry to say this, children to animals, as well as many, many other things best left unspoken. They would also practice acts of kindness, love, and charity, also to an immense level. Now, isn't that confusing? These guys would do really wonderful things, or so it seemed that way, and then do really horrible things. Again, kind of reminds you of, well, sociopaths. They'd get on people's good side, and then they'd do evil, and then they'd switch back and forth to demonstrate that karma wouldn't exist, or doesn't exist, or at least doesn't exist to them, or they could manipulate karma, use it to go after people, or use it for power, or use it for self sort of godhood ascension. But to get to that point, you have to kind of strip yourself bare of all attachments, all materiality, and basically emotions in general. And then you can begin faking emotions to like an extraordinary level, and now you have a perfect Aldmari who has achieved the status of Malnajadara. Yep, that is pretty creepy. So, this is why this particular idea trickles into our New Age and channeled material. Aldmari guides would love to reinforce that nothing matters except God, which sounds nice, doesn't it? It sounds nice that only God matters. However, this is a twisted distortion of actual spiritual truth, because basically what they're saying is nothing matters except the Aldmari, and the Aldmari guides were very, very good at basically looking like beings of light and teaching people these things during, let's say, near-death experiences, during all kinds of spiritual encounters and visions, and yes, even sometimes posing as saintly figures, or yes, even Jesus Christ. They could do all of that while reinforcing a message of kind of this absolutionism, or dissolutionism is actually the terminology that I hear about this, where people are supposed to just transcend everything and just merge back into source consciousness, which is basically means dying a second death. It's a terminology that actually was popular in the 70s called the second death. And the second death is basically a bunch of garbage, right? Because the Aldmari actually wanted death to be real. They wanted a finality. Instead of going into an afterlife or the universe I spoke of before, which we all can go into. In fact, there's more than one universe. There's actually two universes connected to our universe, and each one is magnificent. But instead of going to those universes, the Aldmari belief system wants you to just merge back with Source. Now, since Aldmari spirit guides basically, well, they don't exist anymore as far as I can tell, that influence, that thought process left over from that timeline is still apparent. And that is why this information has to get out there. And yes, they are pretty far from being godly themselves. So let's look at a brief history of the Aldmari. The Aldmari belief systems began to spread like a cult in that timeline. Before everything went back to the future and these guys got eliminated, it was not unlike certain self-help movements that promised greater success, greater corporate success, all kinds of greater things. And their systems worked. It worked so well that it spread across the cosmos, attracting the attention of countless races that integrated into their society. Just imagine some of the weirdo corporate sort of self-help gurus and sociopaths out there. Now you have a good idea what happened, how the Aldmari systems came into being. Over time, a type of mass collective formed with many people integrating their consciousness together into colonies. This formed as the great power of the astral cosmos. The Aldmari, basically over billions of years, became feared, respected, hated, loved, and essentially seized control of all the politics of that timeline's entire galactic civilization. Their evil practices, though, were no secret. This has influenced many others to partake, much to the horror of other seventh density beings. Aldmari began manipulating the astral cosmos to better suit a quote path to enlightenment, and this, in their opinion, was the advancement of consciousness without emphasis on empathy of the soul. And again, this is the type of belief system that still is practiced on Earth and really, really needs to be called out. And that's one reason I'm making this video. As such, they prevented free movement between densities of consciousness, removed natural restrictions in the universe, and began damaging their own timeline in irreparable ways. Now, a lot was done to fix this. It was difficult to completely fix it, and that is one of the reasons that, let's say, very high-level beings, including the great collective force known as God itself, kind of hit the delete key on this entire group. Now let's look at the more recent history of the Aldmari. The greatest targets of the mass karmic reconciliation of the quote New Age was the Aldmari. Of 2.7 billion worlds, almost all fell like dominoes during the great karmic wars of the past timeline. So the Aldmari unfortunately did win this war. Because they won the war, that's why the delete key was hit. But in the process, they did lose all their planets, kind of like in the picture you see here. Massive, massive, massive wars empowered by groups using basically their own negative karma back against them. And this was a huge war involving many, many different species. So as you can see, many groups where we consider ET races, groups like, for example, even the Zeta Reticuli, and many, many other races of different people, different beings, from fantastical beings to ET groups to human-like groups. This is the kind of stuff that goes on that side of life, which is pretty fantastical to think about, but that is just how it is. And imagine massive alliances of these types of people coming together and laying waste to billions of Aldmari worlds. These were the karmic wars, and in a way, those things, in one sense, never even happened, because again, it all got back to the future. Because it all got back to the future, all those horrible wars now never really happened, but people have memories of them because timelines intersected. So people on the other side who were involved may remember fighting in wars like that, but they also remember the whole life never having done it. Because now we're in the fun subject of dealing with paradoxes. Although it's not quite a paradox, it's more like just timelines interweaving and paradoxes fixing themselves by essentially allowing people to remember the differences between two different, let's say, time travel incidences. So when this happened, some of the planets became completely incinerated while most inhabitants received their wish of ascension to God. During this time, many great cultures were lost, but ultimately it was their own fault for acting in abominable ways. And as mentioned, it took a massive alliance and help from even universes far away to get rid of these guys, which they weren't really able to, because again, in the end, they actually won because they manipulated reality in such a way to finally win their war, which basically caused the higher beings and God to flip a light switch and then get rid of them all. So their arrogance became their own defeat. They employed unbelievably dangerous tools of war, including engineering and bending of reality to suit their every single need, notwithstanding their own forms of time travel and extreme mental manipulation and corruption, basically used by forces of, let's say, elemental, in a way, well, really very much like magic, corruption-based magic, ways to get into people's mind and replace those minds with a sentient energy intelligence that begins to take over their souls. Which isn't quite as bad as it seems, because it basically turns somebody into a puppet while their spirit sort of disperses back into the elemental source of God, and what you're left with is like a crazed, I guess for lack of a better term, zombie. These were the kind of nasty things they would do to people. And yeah, that basically means taking over somebody's body, possessing them. Here's a fun fact: possession in our world today, like the Exorcist kind of stuff, that doesn't actually mean that someone's mind has been overtaken, they're lost. It just means that something has swapped out who they were. And that's the kind of stuff that they liked and they employed as a tool of battle. The timeline war ended when an Aldmari group of extremely advanced psychics completely lost their minds and engineered a plan they thought would murder God, and then corrupt our world into madness. You see, God wasn't too happy about that. And when we say corrupt our world into madness, they were hoping this would happen organically without using those corruption-based techniques, which is actually pretty darn impossible. And when I say corrupt our world into madness, I literally mean our world, Earth, because Earth is a battleground between souls, as people know. It's a battleground place of good and evil, and they didn't see it that way, even though they were part of that evil. And as such, they thought a great finishing touch would be to make us all go crazy and basically get like an enormous entity into our minds and make us all begin hearing voices and go insane. It doesn't matter, because none of that even worked. So ultimately, God wasn't too happy, and much higher beings corroborated to simply end that timeline, re-evolving our universes, and we didn't even know it. Because this kind of stuff happens, and we don't even know that it happens. To get rid of the Aldmari, higher beings literally, well, basically wiped from existence all three of our universes in this triumvirate of universes. Our universe, the astral universe, the elder universe, wiped them all away, and then rebuilt them from scratch, reinserting all of us, and we didn't even know it. Like, if you're watching this video, this might come as a surprise, but let's say very recently you died. But you wouldn't know it, because all that happened is like you went in and out, and then you're back, reformed basically your entire life exactly as it was. Same memories, you might have a couple memory-based disparities, but not likely, because it had to be almost completely the same in this world to reintegrate it, or else people wouldn't be able to handle having crisscrossing memories, because people in this world are, sorry to say it, much less advanced than people in higher realms. And so this whole universe basically was wiped and then brought back on the same evolutionary time scale exactly as it was. Let's just say we speed forward by billions and billions of years, we're back to where we were. But now the big difference is that the Aldmari were never around, although everything had to come back exactly like it was, with the same attitude, same people, and yes, even the same Aldmari spirit guides had to kind of be recreated in people's minds, so everything was exactly the same and history didn't change. Isn't that weird? Well, it had to be that way, or else people really would go crazy, because everyone would have wondered where all these other memories came from, right? So that's why the Aldmari influence still remains on our planet, because it all had to come back exactly like it was, and this is why higher dimensional beings are a little bit flipped out. Did you follow all that? Because don't worry, this is the most confusing stuff that I've ever heard of too. Other realms like the astral universe became very different during this process very recently, with this confused and often malevolent group completely removed from history. Yet their presence also remains, as there are many, quote, they are good, but confused Aldmari who had to be brought back from that timeline. Because you can't just wipe people from existence, they have to go somewhere, and all these people that were on a timeline where they existed had to be moved to a timeline where the Empire didn't exist. So you have lots and lots of people in the astral cosmos being spliced back in with all their memories of the old timeline now in a new future. So again, Back to the Future stuff, just think of Marty McFly goes into the future once, and then there's Biff, and then he leaves, and he comes back and has a nice future. It's the same stuff. So everybody from the Biff universe were now being spliced into the new universe, because that's the only way for them to be compatible. When we cross over now, the world beyond is now quite spectacular and wondrous, and this may not have always been the case, even in people's memories. Some people today, especially people who have had like near-death experiences, they may even have these weird crisscrossing memories. If you've really been able to explore, or astral travelers may get some weird crisscrossing memories of, wow, this was a beautiful luminous city made of crystal, and it was very beautiful and amazing architecture, and everyone was, lovely and singing, and it was very splendid. And then they may have a crisscrossing memory of, like, I went into the astral spectrums, the higher astral, and they look kind of redundant. And as weird as it sounds, this is what my spirit team is telling me. And look, I can't say for sure. We just kind of have to confirm these things for ourselves with our own teams. So the Aldmari are gone, or are they? Neither the Aldmari nor Milandara survived the karmic wars during that timeline. Milandara and all good-natured Aldmari, though, were reintegrated in a new timeline that is free of them. So the Aldmari still exist out there, who can basically talk about the eras of their ways, or else they wouldn't have been permitted to come back. They would have just gone back into source and reincarnated as a slug or something. They would just bounce back to God, and then came back down as whatever it was. Maybe in the far future, after their karma gets worked out within the mind of God, because that's kind of how death operates on that side, is that if you die on the other side, you go back into God, and you have to reintegrate the karma, figure out what went wrong, and then over a period of time, yes, time still exists in a way on that side, then you basically come back down and come into a new form, and you might have a chance to come back as who you were again. Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. But in essence, that's how it had to be as well with all the Aldmari. They all had to kind of reintegrate and figure out their way and be able to come back into this new timeline as long as they weren't crazy. And so there's lots and lots of Aldmari still around. And unfortunately, though, the real significance of this is that the Aldmari are still in our world in spirit, because you can look at the influence of a prior timeline and all of that Aldmari, let's say psychological influence on our planet. So their essence can still be found in spiritless, highly efficient corporations, extremely dull in corporate architecture, and the personalities of people that reflect these values. And I also will argue there are leftover elements hiding away in New Age spirituality, including misinterpretations of Buddhism and Eastern religious philosophies that value progression of consciousness and the ignoring of the soul, ideas that life is a theater, and I will call out some authors who talk about how life is a theater, nothing matters, and morality isn't necessarily a real thing, nor is karma. I'm going to call out Robert Schwartz for talking about subjects like this and others, which I think most of us intuitively know is incorrect. And I do work with a group known as the Angelic Order, and this includes absolutely angels, archangels, and saints. And they really, really stress that this is the case, that there's some bad teachings in what we call the New Age movement that we all have to be able to resist so that this Aldmari philosophy never comes back again. So going forward and battling their influence. And before I continue, this is a good time to go back to something I said earlier, which is a kind of crazy, profound thing I said, which is basically that earlier, I won't say precisely when, but at some point recently, everybody died and came back. Well, my spirit team tells me this literally happened because the old universe, the old timeline had to be wiped clean, and now every single person on Earth, including you watching this, died essentially for a split second, went up back to source consciousness, was in there in a kind of time bubble, and then let's say the universe began rebuilding itself, flash forward billions of years, everyone's back. That all happened instantaneously. Some people maybe even felt something a little bit different about them, like they might have been walking around, they felt a little bit dizzy for a second, or like a little bit of a pop, because this is what happened to me. In such an instance, like I felt kind of like a little pop happen. And then suddenly I was informed about what had happened, that there was a timeline change. And in this particular instance, I actually was missing a little bit of memory of something that happened in between, because my spirit team was informing me that this was a period when I died. And then I was brought back. And it absolutely means very little, because my spirit team tells me this type of thing happens all the time. Well, not all the time, I guess, but occasionally. For example, if someone needs to be removed from a situation that is really going to hurt their lives, but their karma is really good, and they have all kinds of psychological damage caused by, let's say, an abusive relationship, then what will happen is that in certain instances, a higher being will come in and kill the person. Isn't that quite weird? And to the outside, it would look like somebody just dematerializes completely. But it would happen when no one can view the person, like when you're laying in bed. You will be killed, brought back up into source, reassembled. Higher beings will perhaps remove that dark influence on you and send you right back. And this only happens in special occasions. Usually with a spirit team, nobody knows it happens, because it doesn't matter. Because we all live anyway through the elemental source parts of God, and we can basically do that kind of thing, and it's not a big deal because, you know, we're talking about the afterlife and death doesn't really exist. But also, in some ways, it does. And yes, basically, 2 nights ago, we all died and came back. Okay, so to make this presentation, clairaudient communication sources included, for example, a light being collective known as the Christ Consciousness Collective, my spirit guide, the Archangel Radiance, the Archangel Lorna, a wonderful yogi named Yogi Bhabanaba, the Archangel Dahlia, and others. And so these are different groups that, different individuals that I've been able to get to know, who belong to different groups, through my spirit team that became my spirit team that want to help out because I'm a pretty darn good clairaudient telepath these days. So these sources insist that we must resist the spirit in our world. The corporate cultures that are so integrated into our culture is a sign of Aldmaric occupation into our way of life that's still there, even though the Aldmari are gone. And so these are not natural ways of being. It can be resisted in our lives by connecting to God, recognizing that karma does not stop and never should stop, for it is the natural cycle tied to love and empathy. One of the last great battlegrounds against forces like this is therefore on Earth. Corporations should not be upended but must change and integrate into more spiritual ways of being, connected in more loving ways, profit incentives enhanced by understanding karma and how a reward is given by helping others as opposed to resisting karma and enforcing tyrannies. This is the needed path forward, and it can be done on the individual level, but most importantly among leaders within our society who hold rank within corporate cultures. And there's a lot more to be spoken about this, but I do want to make a few mentions before we finish this presentation about how things have changed as a result of these very specific things that have happened. So hello, welcome back to looking at my face while I talk. So very, very interesting things have happened since the Back to the Future kind of stuff went on and a bunch of this evil influence disappeared. And that basically involves, this kind of influence leaving the planet, because now there's no more Aldmari spirit guides and things that are encouraging sociopathic behavior. It doesn't mean sociopaths will stop, but my spirit team is encouraging people to pay attention to changes that have happened in the universe after it was rebuilt. So you'll notice that people have a little bit more bounce in their steps, they're a little bit happier, and they almost can't explain why. So I went to basically a bar and nightclub the other day, and that bar and nightclub basically had a spirit about it that I've never seen before in all my days. Everyone, there were even, dudes dancing with each other, basically, how do I say this? This was like a real kind of macho cowboy bar, right? And you have macho dudes spinning each other around, who are definitely not dating because they had their girlfriends with them. And everyone was just a little happier. My spirit team was telling me, look at what happened, look how your planet has changed. There's literally more magic in the planet. I mean that figuratively and literally. And I'll just leave that there for you guys to digest, because it concerns changes that have happened to this universe after it was rebuilt, even though most of us were not aware it even happened, because that's the whole point. Very interesting stuff. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. If you want to work with me one-on-one, I can do that as well. But I hope you found this video interesting. I'll talk to you guys soon.